Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I'm Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Helstrom Season 1, Episode 1. It's called Mother's Little Helpers. So, as an Episode 1, we will therefore start spoiler free. We'll give you an impression of the episode before we go into some spoilers, maybe towards the end. Although Episode 1s tend to be more spoiler light just because we're talking about what it feels like, what the premise says, is it worth watching, that kind of stuff. So, we'll get into it. But this is actually a Marvel series that is a Hulu original, which is at least partially owned by Disney. Is it all owned by Disney
I think
now?
it's majority owned by
Majority
Disney
owned by Disney
now
now.
after their buyout. I think they own like 60% or something like that.
So it's not that weird that a Disney property is on Hulu. It's not even the first time. Before they even owned the majority, there was some Disney or some Marvel properties on uh on Hulu. But this is kind of the first one since they got the majority. So the idea being that this is a more mature show, so something that wouldn't go on Disney Plus. Although that said, I think this was just in development before any of that happened
Yeah,
anyway.
and I think it's interesting that this is the first. So since Disney took over, everything, in terms of the Fox deal, and they acquired, Hulu, they went on a bit of a canceling spree. They kind of were clearing up their TV side of things and kind of bringing it all in house, so they have Disney Plus. They could kind of set everything in the MCU. It's very notable that this isn't. This very much feels, like it could have been one of those older properties quite easily.
It's very separate, and that may be why it didn't get involved in any of that. Is because it's a standalone thing, even as part of Marvel. If you hadn't told me this was a Marvel show, I would never have known. There is nothing about this that makes it feel like a Marvel show, and I get why they have no intent in using Hellstrom or Hellstrom characters in the MCU in any way, at least in any time soon. So
Mm.
they had no problems with this existing. So here it is. The basic premise, which is for the record, something that I don't think either of us had ever heard of until they started developing this show and we got a trailer. But we have kind of demons, supernatural stuff. We have this Hellstrom family. The main character, Damon Hellstrom, is kind of our lead character, and he is basically has the powers. It's very outcast, I suppose, in some ways. He has powers to kind of like, you know, repel demons and things like that. His sister also has some sort of clairvoyant sixth sense when it comes to people and bad things they've done. Their mother is possessed, and there's a whole nasty backstory with her and their father, which almost gave me some sort of almost a Grudge vibes. Like the idea that all this stuff has happened to this family because of this horrible like incident in their childhood, and
I
everything's
can
kind of
see that.
spiraled from there. But he's a lecturer, but he also helps the church with exorcisms, which can, as we see in the episode, ranges from actual exorcisms to just proving that there is no exorcism and or no, well, you know what I mean.
No
No, no,
demon. No,
no,
no exorcism needed.
no need for an exorcism, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But obviously there's a plot for the season where there's something, bubbling. There's some big thing coming that's going to require their attention. The siblings are estranged, Damon and Anna, so we're sort of introduced to them separately. And there's a couple of other characters. We got kind of our conduit character as the audience, Gabriella, who is from the Vatican. Now, admittedly, sure, she has a lot more experience than usually you would have of someone who's there to be the conduit for the audience. But she's new around him and she's new around these characters, so she's the one
She's
asking a
kind
lot
of
of questions.
fresh out of the Vatican. This is her first, real world experience almost.
Yeah, yeah, she's young. She studied really hard, and it sounds like it was a lot of work. But this is her first time in the field. But she's very much there to ask questions, find out who Damon is, who his mother is, who his sister is, what's the backstory. It's kind of a typical, 101 how you draw your audience into a show when you have characters who aren't starting out. This is, Damon is a character who's already doing what he's doing.
Yeah.
We're jumping into a pre-established world and characters here, which has its positives and negatives. Positive being is that we don't necessarily need more origin stories when it comes
No,
to
and this
comic book stuff.
doesn't need one. I mean, one of the positives I will give this episode is that I think it's fine where it jumps in. I think using a character to kind of just introduce us to that this world is a completely fine tactic. We've seen it plenty of times before, and it doesn't do anything wrong with that here. It works exactly as it's intended, which is a positive thing.
Yeah, I was not looking forward to this. I honestly think it looked terrible, but I did not feel anything approaching interest to it
Yeah.
based on the trailer. And honestly, the episode, having watched it, it kind of falls into a nice middle place where I don't particularly like it. I don't particularly dislike it. It's kind of dull in places. It actually feels bizarrely a lot like the Marvel Netflix shows, in that I did feel a lot of it kind of basically just boiling down to two people in a room talking about things for most of the episode.
I can see that. I don't think it's terrible either. I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think it's a little bit tedious because of how cliche it is, and it tries to tell us it's not cliche by like, "Oh, hey, you think you know what's going on? We're gonna throw the rules out the window." But all of it, I feel like I've just seen before, done better. I mean, you mentioned Outcast. It's a recent TV example.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a lot of that here. Um, hell, even the Exorcist TV show, if we're just sticking to TV. Yeah, I feel there's a lot of elements from that in this. There's a lot of things where I feel like I've seen before and done better, but not that this does anything that bad either.
Mm. Arguably, even Lucifer could be thrown into the mix here for what he encapsulate
I
everything.
mean,
It's a bit separate,
tonally, I
but
think that's a little bit different than the other two there.
oh, it
But
is. But I think that's my point. Is that it actually has like it's going for something with a tone. Whereas this feels like it could be Lucifer, but with all of the character stripped away, and it's just the raw thing.
sure, yeah, okay. I guess I see where you're coming from.
And I guess that's maybe my point, is that it's lacking character. Well, it's not really doing anything particularly bad. There's a couple of moments with possessed people that I didn't like, that I thought was a bit goofy. But other than that, there's nothing in the episode that I would point to and go and say, oh, that was terrible, or that was a really awkward story choice, or something like that. It's all just very by the numbers, and that's kind of its biggest problem.
Yeah, like I think the biggest problem I have is when it tries to be. It thinks it's smarter than it is. Like for example, there's a moment right near the start. We talked about how maybe sometimes there are no exorcisms needed. And he kind of calls this out pretty early with an example. And, he's using all the standard exorcism tropes, holy water, Latin incantations. And then it's like, oh, those rules don't apply anymore. And it thinks it's quite smart doing this, but also it doesn't actually feel like it's earned this feeling.
I'm actually going to give it a little bit of credit here, because I do think that this neatly sets something up for later in the episode. Because later in the episode, there's a character who tries to use these very same things in a genuine way because they think it'll help them. And because of this opening scene, it actually kind of added a bit of menace to show how out of the depth that character was in the scene. Because we'd
Mm.
already been shown at the start of the episode, yeah, this is all bullshit and none of it works. So I think there is actually a little bit of craft there in the writing to try and establish something for later in the episode. As much as I know what you're saying, it comes off a little bit. Look at us, we're doing things differently. I do think it actually sets something up for later in the episode.
Okay, I will concede that. I get where you're coming from with that point later on. I just think by that point it was maybe a little. It kind of already put me in a bad place with the initial example that wasn't enough to redeem it.
Yeah, I wasn't feeling too down in the opening scene, really. This it's just honestly the stuff. It's just the sort of the dullness of it, with lots of characters in rooms talking in pairs. The attempts at humor occasionally, I felt a bit flat. My bigger problem though is probably any hints of the season plot, and the idea that some demon has got out of some sort of tomb that's going to
Oh,
cause some sort
yeah,
of havoc. There's a
that was
symbol.
definitely tedious.
Yeah, everything with that, I was just kind of like, okay, all right. There's nothing about it in this episode that feels like it's, I don't know, exciting. It's like, yes, we've been here, we've done this in multiple shows in
And,
various ways and forms.
and that's it. It doesn't feel incompetent.
No,
It doesn't feel like it's really badly written. It's not laughable or anything like that. Like we have reviewed some real bad stuff over the years. This doesn't fall into those categories. And if you haven't watched a lot of horror things, I guess I don't know why you jump in with this, but I mean, for whatever reason, maybe the Marvel brand is what's you're kind of interested because you've seen that it's connected to Marvel and you've not really watched a ton of horror. I can see you probably enjoying this a little bit more because you won't feel the cliche, I guess, of it. You won't feel like you've done all this
I
before.
I
That
get
might appeal a bit more.
I guess that's the sad part, is that that's the word that he uses at the start when he's. We're still in spoiler free, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say the opening scene is him going to an exorcism that turns out to just be a kid faking it, and he kind of calls the kid out on it. He actually uses the words tropes. He says that the incantations, the crucifixes, the holy water, all of it's just it's just all just a trope. Everyone, it's not a secret anymore. There's nothing sacred about it because of movies, of TV, the internet. It's all just a trope. And the sad irony of him using that line of dialogue is that everything I don't like about this is that everything just feels like a trope to me.
Yeah.
with
And
nothing
and
to
that's
separate it or make it feel different or exciting.
and that's kind of where I feel like it's not as smart as it thinks it is, because it's throwing this out there like, hey, we're self-aware, we know that these things are all tropes, and then just commits them all anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I get the impression that it thinks it's smart because it doesn't really do anything else that feels like it's up its own ass. It's more just that
Mm.
it acknowledges the tropes, but that's not enough to actually make us like forgive it for using them all later anyway. Like it doesn't matter that you've
Yeah.
acknowledged them if you're not going to do anything different. It's one thing if you do this as a mission statement and then prove it and back it up and say, no, now we're going to like go out of our way to make everything feel different from what you expect. A little bit of a little thing here that just a coincidence. The actress who plays the mother is called Elizabeth Marvel. That's her name.
Do you know what's I think I knew this somehow. I think we've spoken about this
Maybe.
before, or I read it somewhere, because as soon as you said that, my brain went, "Yes, I knew that." And I'm like, we must have had this conversation at some point when we saw a cast. Probably when she was cast, and we covered it in the TV news.
Oh yeah, probably. I
That's
imagine.
probably the only reason you probably put it in the TV news, was because you saw the name and thought it was a funny connection.
um. So yeah, it's painfully okay. Is how I describe
Yeah.
this. It's painfully okay. It's not as bad as the trailer made it look. I'll give it that.
At least not yet. No.
No, I mean it could
This
get that bad.
Hulu dropped all the episodes, 8 or 10. I can't remember how many now. It dropped them all either way. Um, but I definitely have no desire to sit and watch the rest of them.
Oh no, I could not. I could not be more against that if I tried. It's yeah, it's just really hard to summon any kind of or I'll use a word that feels more applicable to the show. It's hard to conjure any kind of enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, and I don't even have any like burning hatred. Sometimes we'll come into these reviews of an episode one where it's a show that like this, where we saw that trailer and we went, well, we'll do the episode one. We don't think we're gonna like it, and we actively thought the trailer looked quite bad, and we'll kind of just spend 20 minutes ripping into it a little bit and having some fun with how bad it is. This doesn't even fall into that category. I can't muster up the energy to rip it apart because it's fine.
Yeah, it's 55 minutes. I mean, it does feel a bit long, but that might just because it's so dull that the pace, the having it be longer just makes it feel worse. I don't know if it's necessarily because it needs to be. I'm not saying if you cut like 5-10 minutes out of it and sped it up a little bit, it would feel any better. If anything, it would feel more like a network show because it'd feel like it wasn't having the time to breathe. I
I think
imagine.
if you cut 10-15 minutes out of this, it would feel remarkably similar to that Exorcist TV show.
Very possibly. But not as good because I like that show.
Yeah, that was actually quite good from
I,
what we saw.
yeah. Well, we watched the whole first season. I mean, that's just a
We did, yeah.
good enough gauge as
And
there is.
and 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 that actually had some surprises, right?
I know that.
It was, I'm not gonna say it's the best TV ever, but horror TV
Actually,
specifically, there's a lot less of it.
if we can have sort of an objective critique of this episode, is one thing we always talk about in episode ones that this does not have. It does not have the hook at the end. There's nothing introduced at the end of this episode. A character we already knew was kind of, screwed, kind of appears with a sort of horrific visual effect, but it's not actually anything to add to the plot. It's just kind of like, hey, that thing we've been teasing is happening. Here we are teasing it again. That's all. That's all it is.
Yeah, there's often in good first episodes, we do our spoiler-free section, and we say, oh, there's not usually too much to spoil, but there's usually in a good episode, there's one thing. There's one thing that we can't discuss until we get there.
Yeah, there'll be a genuine extra layer that's added to the show at the end of the episode. I think the Shield episode one's a great first example of this, which I won't spoil. Recently we've had other examples. The first episode of Utopia from Amazon, the most recent example,
Yeah.
introduced a whole extra thing in the last scene that wasn't really a part of the premise. I mean, if you'd watched the original show because it was based on a previous UK show, but I mean, forgetting that, but it introduced
that's
a
not
new
their
thing.
fault.
Yeah, but it introduced a whole extra element to the plot that makes you go, oh, okay. And there's countless examples of this.
and this feels a little bit like it's banking on just, well, the next episode's there, and you'll just let it autoplay through, right?
Yeah, and obviously this doesn't apply to every first episode ever, or even the good ones, because obviously different, formats, different, places. I don't expect a network TV show to have it in quite the same way usually, especially for setting up something like, say, not a procedural, but like,
No,
so,
we do have lower expectations for network shows anyway.
well, no, but what I'm saying is, like, to go to the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but that doesn't have the extra layer added in at the end. It doesn't need it because it's just not that type of show. It doesn't have the overall serialized plot in quite the same way in season one. That
Yeah, I think we'd expect it more now
sure, yeah.
than we would have done, 20 years ago.
I'm trying to remember if Supernatural had, because Supernatural's another show you could probably compare to this in some ways.
You probably could.
I,
I never
I,
watched the first episode, so I don't know.
I did. I saw the first like 6 seasons of Supernatural, and I can't remember for the life
That
of
is
me.
an awful lot of Supernatural for you.
Hey, it's less than half the show, so I've not even seen
You know
half of it
That
now.
that is true.
They're wrapping up with season 15, and that's a lot. That is a lot of Supernatural.
And
I
again, I'm saying we're expecting higher standards now. Supernatural started 15 goddamn years ago. Standards were lower, or at least network TV was more even across the board. It was what we generally watched as TV still then.
our TV arguably was better 15 years ago, so I don't know what you're saying. I have nothing else to add. I mean, I don't. I don't there's not a whole lot to talk about, honestly. It introduces character A, which is David. It introduces character B, which is Anna, and it introduces potential villainy things happening. And most of the episode kind of revolves around the idea that some people escaped from this hospital where their mother's kept, and they speculate that the demon in her or whatever has sent someone on this path, and it's going to lead to
Yeah.
some bad things. But for the most part, it's about Gabriella coming to accept that this mother actually is quite dangerous, and she's a bit in over her head. But at the same time, establishing that Damon should maybe cut her some slack and actually try to be helpful and teach her rather than just chastising her for not being completely an expert like he is immediately.
Yeah,
That's
that's
basically
true.
it.
And I think even the possessed mother is another thing that feels a little bit cliche. Um, and I will say the one other moment I really rolled my eyes at because we're doing this moment is when Damon's old mentor, partner, mother figure, kind of shows up while he's teaching at the school or at the college, and he does that bit where he's in mid lecture and he spots her and freezes up for a second. I hate that moment whenever it's in any TV show or movie. It's so overdone. So I'm calling this out because I do have a particular dislike of that.
What you're saying is it's a trope.
It's a trope, but it's a particular trope that I have a real dislike of. Beyond, there are some tropes I'm like, sure, it's a trope, but whatever. But that one I really dislike.
Okay. Um. Yeah. It's super dull. I think honestly that's it. I mean, I'll say spoilers now, so full spoilers for episode one from this point on. Just so I can mention a couple of things that I didn't care for. Uh,
Sure.
I thought there was a few moments with the mother, as much as I was praising her name. There's a couple of moments where she goes a bit demonic towards the end when Gabriella's in with her that came off as a bit goofy to me.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like the acting or anything. I think it's more just the
Yeah,
the direction of what she was being told to do.
yeah, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did think the crawling around the wall looked alright for what it was,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
as far as visual effect goes. So it's not all bad, but I wasn't super into all the little moments. And likewise, the guy who the security guard, I think it was, who broke out with two patients and killed
Mm.
a guard, which was just kind of what the plot is revolving around, is them trying to figure out where they went, and that the demon inside his mother probably sent them on that path. But we see a couple of scenes of them in like a tomb, like underneath a cemetery, and they find like some sort of enclosure, and they release something out of some sort of demonic trap, which in the scene you think kills the security guard, but when you see him at the end with half of his face or not melting off, but ripped off, and it's kind of like, okay, so he's out there, and it gives us sort of generic jump scare as he lunges towards the guy, going back into his truck,
Yeah.
which it's just you know
It's
again a
fine.
bit generic. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, the actual, like I say, most of it really revolves around Gabriella trying to like convince her way into being included, and then sneaking into the room and getting into some trouble.
I do think it's a little bit frustrating that she's probably more interesting to watch than Damon is. I think she's just got a little bit more to her being okay, fresh out of the vacuum and kind of experiencing the real world horror.
But
It's a little bit more interesting than just his jaded, you'll get over it sort of thing.
I think the reason why I compared this to Lucifer earlier is because now I'm thinking about it, the actor feels like he probably would have auditioned for Lucifer.
He feels like the Lucifer actor crossed with Deke from Agents of Shield.
Yeah,
I think it's
okay.
his voice that does it for the Deke half for me. But kind of in general, I can kind of see that in my mind anyway.
I think when you compare him to like Lucifer and then someone who was really sort of more drab and serious, I wasn't
No,
expecting
no,
another
I think
comical
it's just
character.
for whatever. I think it's his voice reminds me of the actor who plays Deke for whatever reason. It just triggers something. I
Okay.
was thinking it throughout the episode.
Other than that, I mean, we get an example of what they're both like. Obviously, the opening scene was for Damon. Anna gets one where she kind of like, basically gets the serial killer. You know, she sort of lures him in. He's bidding for stuff, and
Rich francophile billionaire
yes,
who has killed 7 women, I think she said,
yeah, well, it really
and she
matters
just
what the
knows
precise
these
number was.
things. Yeah, I mean, I guess 7 is more impressive than 3 in this context.
She can sense it. Uh, I mean, yeah, but it's fine. It's it establishes that she goes after bad people, which gives you a sense of what she's like. I didn't really like her and her assistants like sort of bickering or their
Yeah, and there was a bit where the assistant was like, "Hey, I cleaned this up, and it's not like the old days." And I think this was maybe before we knew she was the sister, and I was like, "Oh, how old is she?" I was like, "Has she been doing this for like hundreds of years?"
yeah, I don't know. They tried to go for a bit of comedy here, where he was kind of annoyed at her for just sort of taking him from granted, but it never really felt like it worked for me. And honestly, the reveal that they were the brother and sister of each other was kind of weirdly handled. I thought because there's a line where she goes to look at this tomb right where the security guard went. Her and this guy she knows are sort of looking at it, and he says at one point, "Why don't you call your brother?" And I immediately went, "Oh, is this a tease that these two characters are brother and sister?" And then there was like another awkward mention in the other end where someone mentioned his sister, and I'm
Mm.
like, I don't know if this is smart the way this sort of seen it in both plots, or if it just feels kind of oddly clunky that they're not just doing a
I think it's too in your face by doing it in both plots scenes apart like that. I think it's a bit
yeah.
too, obvious and like, "Hey, you're gonna get this."
If anything, I would have like avoided letting us know so that when she showed up at the end and we realized like, oh, that could have been that could have been the thing. That could have been the thing at the end. It was like, oh, there's the other layer. These are brother and sister.
Yeah, I think you could have done it with one of them, go, "Oh, mention either a sister or a brother, in one of their scenes respectively." And maybe you'd be thinking of the other lead, you might kind of think that, but mentioning it once is okay. Mentioning it in both plots kind of forces you to connect it quite obviously.
Well, it's not even that. It doesn't save it for a reveal though. It's mentioned casually when
Yeah.
the mother figure woman is telling the story to Gabriella. She talks about
Mhm.
Anna being the sister repeatedly. What
It's
I
true.
would have done is I would have had neither of them mention a sibling, right? And then when she's telling that story, the backstory, and we get glimpses of this the awful childhood where they mention their father was a serial killer. Um, when they're doing that, mention that he has a sister in that scene, but don't name her. Just say, okay, him and his little sister, and we see her in the flashback, so we get a sense of like him having a sibling. And then when she shows up in the car park, towards the end, and he's like, "Oh, you made the trip." Then have that
Mhm.
be the moment where it clicks for us that, oh wait, that's the sister. That's this other mysterious woman who's been hunting serial killers. That's his sister, and that's why she hunts serial killers, and why she also has a power. Is they're all part of the
Yeah.
same family.
No, you're right. And I think, to be honest, I'd kind of forgotten that scene where she's telling that story because it was just his 3 minutes of exposition.
Mm-hmm.
So my brain absorbed the information and then forgot it was an actual scene.
Yeah, I just that's just a little bit quicker thought experiment for how to kind of give the episode that extra layer at the end, that extra hook to say, and here's the thing we've not revealed to you yet that's now important for the show going forward. But
Yeah, that would give you that element of, oh, they're actually brother and which I think was in the kind of show description that we heard in the past. So we probably knew this, and
I think that's
Yeah,
okay
but
because most people
that's
who,
fine. Most people don't
yeah,
read these things, so I'm not holding that against
and
it.
very often, even though I do read them on the news, I'll forget most of these descriptions by the time I watch them. So
Yeah, it'll usually come back to me like as I'm watching the episode, like as it'll say things or do things. I'll be like, oh yeah, I knew this.
yeah, I wouldn't worry
Uh,
too much about that. Uh,
no,
yeah, it's 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 completely and utterly kind of okay. That's the review.
yeah,
I don't want to watch any more of it. It's not embarrassingly bad either. It's just it's there.
I
It
am
exists.
I am amazed we have stretched 25 minutes out of this.
Uh, and we're not going any further. That is, let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. It's super important and helps us out a lot if you do so. You can even ding the bell if you want to get notifications. But that's all the free support, which is all greatly appreciated. If you want to go a little nudge further, you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us over there for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. Otherwise, get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. But that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, guys. Have you got any vanilla?